Hey everyone, thanks for joining. I'd love to know where you're watching from. Let me know in the comments. So let's start our story. Something happened 63 years ago that haunted me my entire life. I've never told anyone about it until now. I'm an old man. For the last couple of years, I've comforted myself by saying I'm in my early 70s, but math is simple and unforgiving. Today is my 75th birthday, and God, the years do fly. I'm not here for your well wishes. This is hardly a milestone I'm excited about. I'm glad to still be here, of course, but I find I have less and less to live for with every passing year. My bones ache, my kids live far away, and the other side of my bed has been empty for just over 8 months now. Once I cast my vote against that goddamn Trump this November, I may have nothing to live for at all. So spare me your happy birthdays and your congratulations, if you please. I'm here because I have a story for you, and it's one I've never told before. I used to think I kept it inside because it was silly, or maybe because nobody would believe it. I've found, though, that the older you grow, the more exhausting it becomes to lie to yourself. If I'm being perfectly honest, I've never told anybody this story because it scares me, almost to death. But death seems friendlier than it used to, so listen closely. The year was 1950. The setting was a small town in Maine. I was a boy of 9, rather small for my age, with only one friend in the world to speak of, and his family, seemingly on a whim, decided to move 2,000 miles away. It was shaping up to be the worst summer of my life. My pop wasn't around and my mom was a chore whore boy. Was I proud of myself when I came up with that one, so I wasn't apt to hang around the house. With some hesitation, I decided the public library was the place to be that summer. The library's collection of books, particularly children's books, was meager, to say the least. But within the walls of that miserly structure, I would find no undone chores, no nagging mother, God rest her soul, and perhaps most importantly, no other children with whom I would be expected to associate. I was the only kid with a low enough social status to spend his precious days of freedom sulking amid the bookshelves, and that was just fine with me. The first half of my summer was even more dreadful than I had imagined it would be. I would sleep in until 10, do my chores, and then ride my bike to the library, and by bike, I mean rusty log of shit attached to a pair of wheels. Once there, I would split my time between unintentionally annoying the elderly patrons and deliberately doing so. One pleasant lady interrupted my incessant tongue clicking to hiss a "shut the fuck up" at me the first time I ever heard a grown-up use the F word. Big fucking deal, I know, but in those days it was unheard of. The dreary days turned to woeful weeks. I had begun praying for school to start again until I discovered the basement. I could have sworn I'd roamed every inch of that library, but one day, in the far corner behind the foreign language collection, I stumbled across a small wooden door I had never seen before. That was where it all began. The door was windowless, and made from oak that looked far older than the wall in which it rested. It had a knob of black metal that quite literally looked ancient. I wouldn't have been surprised to learn it was crafted in the 17th century. Engraved on the knob was what appeared to be a single footprint. I had the sense that whatever lay beyond this door was forbidden to me, and therefore probably the most interesting thing I would encounter all summer. I quickly glanced around to make sure nobody was watching me, then turned the heavy knob, slipped behind the door, and shut it. There was nothing, only darkness. I took a couple of steps and then stopped, unnerved by the totality of the shadow which surrounded me. I waved my hands in front of me in an attempt to find a wall or a shelf or anything to hold on to. What I found was far more subtle, a small string, dangling from above but far more useful. I grabbed it firmly and pulled it down. Back in the day, lots of light bulbs were operated with strings, and this was one of them. My surroundings were instantly illuminated. I was standing on a small, dusty platform that looked as though it hadn't seen life in quite some time. To my left was a crickety-ass spiral staircase, made of wood and appearing ready to collapse at any second. The bulb was the only source of light in the room, and it was feeble, so when I peered over the railing to see what lay below, the bottom of the staircase dissolved into the darkness. I was beginning to feel scared. This place, wherever I was, seemed to have no business in a town library. It was as though I were in a completely different building. But no 9-year-old likes to let a mystery go unsolved. Looking back, I wish I could tell my prepubescent self to turn around, go back, and do anything else besides descending that staircase. You'll be spared a lot of sleepless nights, I'd say. But of course I didn't know that then, and I may not have listened even if I had. So instead of turning back, I took a deep breath, gripped the railing, and glared resolutely forward as I began my descent. The wood on the railing was dry and covered with splinters. I immediately let go, holding my hands out for balance as I carefully traversed the staircase. It was, or at least seemed, very long, and with only the dim glow from the string bulbs far above me, my heart pounded mercilessly in the darkness. Even kids can sense when something isn't right. I think they just don't always give a shit. By the time my feet reached the cement floor at the bottom, the light from the bulb above was very nearly a memory. But there was a new light source, and God, I'll never forget it. Directly in front of me was a door, massive, and a deep shade of red. The light was coming from behind the door, and it shone out in thin lines from all four sides, a sinister, dimly glowing rectangle. For the second time, I took a deep breath and went through a door I shouldn't have. In contrast to the dank room I entered from, the room behind the door was blinding. When my eyes adjusted, what I saw nearly took my breath away. It was a library, the most perfect library imaginable. I gaped in wonder as I stepped, almost reverently, further into the room. It was beautiful. It was smaller than the library above, much smaller, but it seemed to be almost tailor-made for me. The shelves were packed with brightly colored titles. Both armchairs in the middle of the room were exquisitely comfortable, and the smell, my God, the smell was simply unbelievable. Sort of a mixture of citrus and pine. I simply can't do it justice with words, so I'll suffice it to say that I've never smelled anything better. Not in my 75 years. What was this room? Why had I never heard of it before? Why was nobody else here? Those were the questions I should have been asking. But I was intoxicated. As I gazed around at all the books and basked in the smell of paradise, I could only form one thought: I will never be bored again. In truth, boredom only hid from me for 3 years. It was on my 12th birthday, 63 years ago to this day, that everything changed. Before that day, I visited my basement sanctuary as often as I could, usually several times a week. I never saw another soul down there, yet strangely remained free of suspicion. I never removed a book from that room, but instead would pick up a particular volume wherever I had stopped reading during my previous visit. I sat, always in the same deep purple armchair, and always leaving its twin baron and directly across from myself. That armchair was mine, the other was, well, I suppose I couldn't have articulated it then much better than I can now. But it wasn't mine, that's for damn sure. On my 12th birthday, I arrived later than usual. My mom had invited a couple of classmates and some cousins over to our house to celebrate. A gesture which I found more tedious than touching, really. I just wanted to spend my birthday sitting and reading and smelling paradise. Eventually our guests went home, and I made it to the library about 15 minutes before closing time. That didn't matter, the workers never checked down there before they locked up. I was free to stay as late as I wished. This particular night, I was devouring the final chapters of an epic adventure: knights, swords, dragons, and the like. I didn't smell it until I read the final words and closed the book. The once exquisite aroma of that room had turned sour. I sat for a moment, unsettled. Objectively, I could recognize that the smell was the same as it had been before, that mixture of citrus and pine. I just perceived it differently, and I didn't like it anymore. It was the nasal version of an optical illusion, you know, the one that looks like a young woman glancing backward, but all of a sudden you see that it's an old woman facing toward you. You can't unsee that, and I couldn't unsmell this. The spell was broken. The odor also seemed, for the first time, to be coming from somewhere specific. With a fair amount of trepidation, I stalked around the room, sniffing the air like a crazed canine until I came to a shelf near the back. The shelf was perfectly normal, with the exception of one title, a large, leather-bound cover of solid faded maroon, with one striking black footprint at the top of the spine. This was the source of the smell. I opened the front cover, and saw one sentence scrawled neatly in blood-red ink atop the first page. Rest your sorrows down, friend, and leave them where they lie. I stared at this sentence, mesmerized, as I began to retreat to my chair. I turned a page. Blank. The smell became stronger. Another page, blank, and the smell grew stronger still. I stopped for a moment, suppressed a gag, and continued walking. Then, as I neared the armchairs, I turned one final page, and there, in the same sinister print, was the last thing I expected to see: my own name. I dropped the book. I began to sprint toward the door, but as I shifted my gaze forward, my heart leaped to my throat, and I stopped in my tracks. The empty chair wasn't empty anymore. An aged man in a suit sat before me, one leg crossed over the other, contemplating me with piercing gray eyes and a light smirk. This was all too much. I fell to my knees and expelled the contents of my stomach onto the carpet. I wiped my mouth, staring at my vomit, when I heard the man let out a chuckle. I stared at him disbelievingly. "Who are you?" I asked, panic in my voice. The man leapt to his feet, grabbed me gently by the shoulders, and helped me to my chair. He sat, once again, on his own. "I fear we got off to a bad start," he said, glancing at the pile of sick on the carpet. "The smell. It does take some getting used to." "Who are you?" I repeated. "Tonight you will know hardship like you've never before known," he said. "I come as a friend, offering you refuge from it, and from all other storms which lie ahead." I wanted nothing more than to leave at that moment, but I remained seated. I asked him what he was talking about. "Your mother is dead, my boy. By her own hand in her kitchen. The scene is gruesome, I must admit," he said in sorrowful tones, but was there a playful glint in his eye? "Surely you wish to avoid this path. I can show you a safer one." My blood ran cold at the horrors this man spoke of, but I did not believe him. "What do you want with me?" I demanded, trying to sound braver than I felt. He laughed, an old, raspy yelp that seemed to shake him to his bones. "Nothing but your friendship, dear boy," he said. Then, sensing I found his answer inadequate, he expounded. "I want you to come on a journey with me. My work is noble, and you will make a fine apprentice. And maybe, when I'm done," he sighed tiredly, running his bony fingers through his thin white hair, "maybe then, my work can be yours." I stood up, shuffling toward the door but never breaking his gaze. "You're crazy," I told him. "My mom isn't dead. She's not." "See for yourself, if you must," he said, gesturing toward the door. I threw him a contemptuous glare and bolted for the exit. As my hand closed around the knob, he said my name softly. In spite of myself, I turned around. "Your road won't be easy, friend. If it ever becomes too much for you, and I mean ever," he said, pausing to sweep his hand over the room, "you know where to find me." I slammed the door behind me and took the decrepit stairs two at a time. I exited the library, clambered onto my bike, and hightailed it home. The front door was wide open. I dismounted, leaving my bike in a heap on the ground, and approached the house cautiously. The old man was lying. He must have been. Still, tears began to sting my eyes. Heart pounding, I stepped inside and called for my mother. I heard no answer, so I turned into the kitchen. To this day, I don't know why she did it. I've lived in that small town in Maine my entire life, although I've kept mostly clear of the public library. Once in my late 20s, I summoned the courage to step inside. Life was good at that time, and my fear had begun to morph into idle curiosity. Where the door to my basement sanctuary once stood was only a blank wall. I asked the librarian what had become of that basement, though in my heart I knew the answer. "There was no basement," she said. There had never been a basement. In fact, if she had her facts correctly, city zoning ordinances prohibited a basement in the area. I've been haunted by that sickly sweet smell, that poisonous blend of citrus and pine, ever since that long-ago birthday. When I saw my mother in the kitchen that day, collapsed in a pool of her own blood, I smelled it. When a man claiming to be my father knocked on my college apartment door, begged me for money, and beat me to within an inch of my life when I refused, I smelled it. When my wife miscarried our second child, I smelled it, and again when she miscarried our fourth. When our oldest son got behind the wheel of the family Buick, completely shit-faced, and got his girlfriend killed, I smelled it. I began to smell it periodically as my wife became sick. She died late last year, and now I'm alone for the first time in more than half a century. Now I smell it every day, and it feels like an invitation. A few months ago, I went back to the library, and the small oak door with the ancient handle was there right where it used to be. My evening walk has brought me past that library every day since, but I haven't gone inside. Maybe tonight I will. I'm frightened to die, yes, but lately I'm even more frightened to keep living. The old man was right, my road hasn't been easy, and I doubt it will get any easier. Rest your sorrows down, friend, and leave them where they lie. He promised relief. A refuge, he said. Was he right about that too? There's only one way to find out. After all, I still know where to find him. I spoke for the last time last night. I have been living alone for the last 2 years. Fresh out of college, I got a very stable and very isolating job in work-from-home data entry for a large medical company out west. I have always been a keep-to-myself kind of person, and I never really had any friends that didn't last through the next grade or semester. I just never found myself as someone who got much out of long-term company and interaction. I had plenty of so-called friends drop me when they moved to different states and cut all contact. These experiences of having someone and then losing them have turned me off from friendships and relationships altogether. I know it's not healthy for me, but at the end of the day, I always find comfort in knowing that I always have myself to keep me company. I found a great third-floor apartment near where I went to school, and being very familiar with the area after 4 years moved myself in from my dorm with no trouble. Remote work from home in my field has many benefits. Usually just a super simple population of data on spreadsheets or systems of medical data and records. No meetings or calls daily, nor reason to ever be on a mic or camera. Due to its sensitivity, it pays very well, and I have made myself a good and simple, albeit quiet life post-grad, everything my loner self could have dreamed of. One thing you start to notice when you live alone is how few times a day or even a week you actually talk or even say anything. I had no coworkers, roommates, or even pets to talk to, and sometimes would find myself going entire days without speaking a word. I didn't tend to go out and would spend my nights gaming or reading, or in a silent workout at the gym. It is a strangely peaceful existence not having to talk or hold any conversations. When I would talk at a restaurant, to the doctor, or to my mom on one of her monthly calls, I would often have an odd experience hearing my voice, as if it was the voice of another being projected through me. Usually, just an odd feeling to shake off, like how it feels to eat food you have not eaten for a while, a sensory adjustment to the now changed world around me. This had never been something I had dwelt on in the past, as usually I would go a day or two before eventually having to talk, never really thinking of it as a disturbing or unusual experience. That was until last night. I never typically ordered in food, but I had done so today after a busy day in systems and spreadsheets. I caved and ordered some pizza from a nearby restaurant online through a delivery app and had it delivered to my door. I always selected the no contact or leave at door option. Chalk it up to my growing antisocial personality, but if I could minimize any human interaction and maintain my almost monastic vow of silence, it was a win for me. As I pushed back onto my living room couch, I waited for my food, which was to arrive in a few minutes. This peace was shattered by a firm but gentle knock on my door. Odd, I thought to myself as I checked the leave at door option, but mistakes happen. I was not pressed over it at all, especially as someone who had driven for a similar delivery app during the pandemic. As I approached the door, I was greeted by a perfectly normal-looking, ordinary taller brown-haired man who smiled and handed the box to me. He said the following in a carefree and airy tone of voice. "Have a good rest of your night and enjoy, sir. Looking forward to hearing from you soon." I crinkled my nose at the last part, but took the box and nodded to him, curtly saying thank you while shutting the door. I noticed he stood outside my door for about 5 seconds before walking away and whistling a tune to himself. At the time, I assumed he just expected a good review, which I gave him on the app, but something about that "hearing from you soon" didn't quite sit right with me. I am beginning to realize what he might have meant. The rest of the evening went off without a note. I devoured the pizza and went to throw the box away. It was at this point I noticed the top of the pizza box had been cut into a few times by what I assumed was the knife or slicer at the restaurant, but it looked ... I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but it looked less like random cuts and more like deliberate attempts to write. I could make out no recognizable words and symbols, so I took the benefit of the doubt and threw the box out. I took a shower and went to bed with nothing amiss. That all changed this morning. I was woken up that next day by a phone call, which would have been a cause for alarm, but it was from my mom, one of her usual monthly check-in calls. I picked up the phone and spoke into it. "Hey, Mom." Or at least I attempted to speak that into it. Instead, all that came out of my throat was a dusty and almost wind-like shrill into the receiver. I attempted to clear my throat, chalking it up to just waking up, and tried again. Nothing. Every time I tried to speak, the only sound that could be heard was a shrill and guttural rushing noise that sounded and felt like a dagger to my lungs. Like as if they had been penetrated with a knife and only the rushing sound of air out of them could be heard as I attempted to speak. My mom said my name several times and eventually hung up as I frantically tried to speak. I ended up texting her and lying, saying I was doing well and was having tech issues but would call her later. I tried looking at my mouth and throat in a mirror and saw nothing amiss. Tried drinking water and making tea with honey, but there was nothing I could do to get my voice back. Eating and swallowing were perfectly normal, but I could not speak no matter how hard I tried. A bit panicked, I found a doctor who was open on the weekend and grabbed my keys to hop into my car to race there as fast as I could. I hoped it wouldn't be any trouble that I had not called before. Obviously I couldn't with my lack of voice. As I opened the door to run to my car, I was stopped dead in my tracks, faced with the same man who had delivered my food to me yesterday. As I opened my mouth to shout in surprise, I heard a voice. "Told you I would be hearing from you soon." It was not the shrill and nasally voice I had heard yesterday when the food was dropped off. No, it was my voice, crawling its way from his lips, through the wry smile he wore on his face. He gave me a wink and walked out towards the stairs leading down from my apartment, leaving me standing in the front door in horror of what I had seen and heard. It was at this point that I realized I had not lost my voice. It had been taken from me. Somehow this thing I took for granted had been stolen from me. I don't think any doctors are going to be able to help me. I do not know what I can do. Someone else has my voice. Last year, my best friend Ally and I went on this great American road trip, trying to ski in as many states as possible in the month we had taken off from work. We did a lot of skiing, a lot of driving, and a lot of sleeping on various couches, truck stops, and of course in motels. Most motels were fine. Some had great free breakfasts. Some had dirty hot tubs that left us scrubbing ourselves in the shower and joking about getting pregnant from the water. Some had weird stains we tried not to think about. Some were spotless but cold, and a few were amazing. Only one was terrifying. We stopped at the motel around 10:30 after a long day of skiing followed by a good 6 hours of driving. We were tired and sore and ready for bed. We had made some wrong turns and were not exactly sure where we were. We didn't want to use data on our Canadian phones, so we were navigating old school with a map. It was mildly unsuccessful, but we were pretty sure we had a few more hours of driving until the next town, and we were not looking forward to it. So when we saw the glorious neon sign that blinked motel and vacancy at us, we didn't need to say anything. We both knew that was where we were staying for the night. As we pulled up in front of the office, I noted that we were the only people staying there. I told myself that it wasn't creepy. We were stopping close to a summer tourist spot midwinter, and of course there would be an excess of rooms. In fact, we should consider ourselves lucky that they were open at all. It was definitely not creepy. We entered the office, and a shrill little bell announced our entry to the world. We waited for someone to come to the front desk. Then we waited a bit longer. We shared looks with lifted eyebrows and tapped our fingers impatiently on the desk. "Hello," Ally called out in the silence. "Somebody here." We waited a few more minutes, then the door behind the counter slowly opened. An old man poked his head out, spotted us, and his face split into a wide grin. "Guests," he said. "You know, I thought I heard something, but I told myself it was just my imagination. Just my imagination. We don't get a lot of visitors around this time. And two beautiful young ladies, too. Ah, I'm sorry I kept you waiting. I just couldn't believe that I had such luck. Welcome, 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 welcome." He was certainly an odd duck, but I used to work long, lonely night shifts. I know how excited you get when something happens. "So, travel-weary strangers, can I offer you a bed to rest your head?" he smiled. "Yeah, how much is a double room?" He looked at us, grin not wavering. $99 for 2 beds, $79 for 1 bed. I was ready to splurge for the 2 beds. Allie moved a lot in her sleep and hogged the covers. Last night she had kept waking me up. "Let's do 2 beds, I looked at her pleadingly. She gave me a quick look filled with annoyance. I looked back at the man. His grin had faded. He looked as annoyed as Ally for a moment. When he noticed me looking at him, his grin snapped back into place. Actually, it seems we only have the 1 bedrooms ready. I'm so sorry." Wait, what I couldn't help but burst out. "There are like no people here." "Oh yes, that is the problem, isn't it? Sometimes we don't keep all the rooms prepped in winter. Saves costs, you know." I considered that. It didn't make sense at all, but I was too tired to argue. "You know what, for such pretty ladies I give you a discount. How about $69 for the 1 bedroom? "We'll take it," Ally responded before I had time to think. "Thank you." We can pay by card, right? Ah, no, I'm afraid not. We don't, well, we never got around to that modern stuff. Gotta stay off the grid, right? Haha, he laughed at his own joke. I shuddered involuntarily. We had cash. It was fine. He was creepy, but we were tired. We paid, got the keys, drove up, and parked in front of the room. I grabbed my stuff from the car, unlocked the door, and surveyed the room. It looked clean enough. The bed was big, and I was tired as hell. Hey, I'm gonna go for a little walk, actually. My legs are so stiff, Ally said from behind me. Wanna come? I eyed the bed. It looked too comfortable. Ally had a good point, but that bed was speaking to me. Nah, just shower and crash. Okay, cool. I won't be very long. She turned and left. I slammed the door shut behind me and stripped out of my clothes as fast as I could. I jumped in the shower, and the luxurious feeling of hot water ran down my body. I had to force myself to get out. I went into the room, put on my PJs, and laid down on the bed. Ally wasn't back yet, but her nighttime strolls sometimes lasted as long as an hour, even when she was this tired. She had a hard time falling asleep, and those walks apparently helped. I got my phone out and tried connecting to the Wi-Fi. It didn't work. I immediately got annoyed, not because I really needed the Wi-Fi, but because I had paid for it, and I wanted it. So I just laid there, getting annoyed, glaring at the ceiling fan. It was a weird model, something black sticking out from the bottom. I had never seen that before. I wondered idly what it did. Then I thought about how we were the only people staying here, how Ally was walking somewhere alone in the dark, how I didn't know where she was, how creepy that guy had been when he laughed at his joke about staying off the grid. Then the familiar feeling of fear started creeping into my guts. I knew where my mind was going. I have an overactive imagination. I tend to turn every situation into a horror movie in my head. It's a real problem in my dating life. I think most guys are serial killers. Ally always makes fun of me for it. I thought about how the guy had offered us 2 beds and then refused to give it to us. Did he want us in this room specifically? Why? He probably had some creepy fantasy of 2 young girls sharing a bed. Irk. I shook my head, trying to stop my mind from spinning out of control. I got out of bed and went over to the huge mirror on the wall. I got my hair out of the towel and started brushing it. I couldn't quite get rid of the uneasy feeling in the pit of my stomach. I knew I wouldn't sleep well that night. For some reason, I thought of the one-way mirror scene in Cabin in the Woods. God, why do I watch horror movies? They always come back to me at the worst times. So creepy. I vaguely recall that there's a way to check if it's a real mirror. What was it again? You touch the mirror, and if there's no gap between your finger and the mirror finger, it's fake? I touched the mirror. There was no gap. I could see my eyes widening in fear in the mirror. No, wait. That can't be it. I tried to reason with myself. That's ridiculous. This is fine. We're fine. It's got to be the other way around. But maybe. I realized I could check the bathroom mirror. It was one of those medicine cabinet mirrors. That one was clearly real. I walked slowly into the bathroom. Please be the same. Please be the same. Please be the same, I muttered. I wiped the fogged mirror, took a breath, and slowly pressed my index finger against the surface. Ice filled my veins. A gap. I took a deep breath, trying to clear my mind. We needed to get out of there. Where was Ally? I felt panic bubbling. I needed to get out of there. Okay, but play it cool. They could be watching. Who the hell are they? I can't let them know I know. I have to get out of here. The black thing on the fan. My breath caught in my throat. It had to be a camera. I went back into the bedroom and started putting my stuff back in my little bag. I hoped it looked innocent enough. Maybe we wanted an early start, right? Maybe I had OCD and liked all my stuff in my bag. It was fine. I went to put the bag in the car. I turned the doorknob. It didn't move. I tried to stay calm, not to panic. They could be watching. Maybe it was jammed. I tried the handle again. Nothing. I used all my force. Nothing. I got my phone out and figured I'd text Ally and call the police. Something. No signal. I wanted to cry. I looked around the room for a window. For the first time, I noticed they had bars in front of them. I've seen that before, of course. It's a safety precaution. My ground floor apartment in the city also had them, so that people can't break in. I had never before considered that they also very effectively stopped people from breaking out. I figured the door must unlock from the outside only. Once you're in the room, you're stuck there. I pinned all my hopes on that idea. Ally would come back, unlock the door, and we'd get out of there. The next 10 minutes were the longest of my life. I kept trying to come up with a plan, with something, but my mind was drowned in adrenaline. Finally, I heard steps outside. Ally was back. I got up, standing right next to the door. She put the key in the lock, turned it, and it opened. Ally, get in the car right now, I said as I pushed her out of the room. What? Why? Fucking camera in the room, I hissed as I pushed her back. Her eyes went wide, and she immediately obliged. I unlocked the car, threw my bag in the back, and we both jumped in. The door to the adjacent room burst open, and the old man came running out. He slammed his hands on the hood as if to try to hold us back with his bare hands. We both screamed as I skidded out of there. Even in my panic, I could see several shapes behind him, in the room. He had not been alone. I just kept driving, praying that they weren't following us. We have to call the police, Ally said after an hour of driving. We have to. I nodded. She used her precious data to find the number of the local sheriff's office and called them up. Only heard half the conversation. Hey, I want to report an almost crime. I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure what. No, sir. It's not a joke. We were staying at this motel, and there was a camera. And one of those one-way mirrors, I interjected. What, she turned to me. Yeah, tell him. And a one-way mirror. And the door didn't unlock from the inside, she said, looking to me for confirmation. I nodded. And there were people in the room behind that mirror, too. Her eyes went wide in fear as she repeated the information. Then she described the location of the motel. Yes. No, she sounded uncertain. We've been skiing, she frowned. Yeah. No, that's fine. We'd rather not. I looked at her quizzically. No, really, we're already out of state. We just wanted to let you know. She abruptly hung up. What was that? I don't know. He wanted us to come back and give a statement. Shouldn't we? She didn't say anything for a little while. I don't know, I got a really bad vibe. Let's not, please. In small-town American sheriff's office. That's like totally how you die in the horror movies. We're not in a horror movie, though. Aren't we? I shrugged. I wasn't really stoked on the idea of going back either. Frankly, I was still worried that they were following us. I really didn't want to get pushed off the road by some psycho hillbilly motel manager. And we had told the police we had done our part, or so I thought. But yesterday there was a story in the news about 3 young girls going missing. They were road tripping in that area, never made it back to Seattle. I can't help but wonder if they stopped at that same motel. I can't help but wonder what would have happened if Allie didn't take that walk, if we both got locked in that room, what the people in the other room expected, what they were going to do. If they just watch, if. Well, if Ally and I could have been that missing person story.